We begin with breaking news that marks a historic check on presidential power. Just hours ago, the Supreme Court delivered a stunning 6-3 blow to President Trump's tariff empire, a policy that has been absolutely central to his economic agenda. In a landmark decision, the court invalidated roughly 60% of all of Trump's tariffs, effectively cutting the nation's average tariff rate almost in half, from 9.5% down to 5%. This is historic because even with a conservative majority, the justices ruled that the president had overstepped his constitutional authority. He had used an emergency law designed for national security crises, like wars or pandemics, to impose sweeping taxes on nearly every country in the world. The court's message was crystal clear. The power to tax belongs to Congress, not the president. Now, while the president has called the ruling a disgrace, he's also signaling he won't give up and has backup plans. Interestingly, Wall Street loved this news, with stock markets hitting record highs because the ruling provides clarity for businesses. In fact, the Port of Los Angeles is already preparing for a flood of cargo ships, as importers rush to get goods in before any new policies can be put in place. This ruling throws into question up to $175 billion in tariff revenue already collected by the government, money that might now have to be refunded. So how did we get to this legal showdown? Let's rewind to see how this tariff empire was built. When President Trump returned to office in January 2025, he had a clear vision: to use tariffs as his primary economic tool to reshape global trade. It started in February with tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, but by April, on a day he called Liberation Day, the strategy exploded to include over 90 countries. The tariff rates were massive, hitting some countries incredibly hard. Think 50% on goods from Brazil and India, and 35% on Canada. The government was collecting money hand over fist, pulling in $30 billion a month in revenue, 4 times the previous amount. But here's the reality check. Despite the aggressive strategy, none of the stated goals were achieved. The U.S. trade deficit remained virtually unchanged at $901 billion. Instead of a manufacturing boom, the country actually lost 108,000 manufacturing jobs in 2025. And who paid for these tariffs? It wasn't other countries. It was American companies and consumers, with the average household paying an extra $1,000 last year. So when the Supreme Court took up the case, it was against a backdrop where the policy's economic success was already in serious doubt. This ruling doesn't mean the end of tariffs, but it does mean the end of Trump's previous playbook. He still has other legal tools, but as this slide shows, they come with significant constraints. Think of it as trading a sledgehammer for a toolkit of smaller, more specialized instruments. For example, he has Option 1 under Section 122 of the Trade Act. It's quick to deploy, but it's severely limited, with a cap of just 15% that only lasts for 150 days, not nearly enough to replicate a 50% tariff on Brazil. Then there's Option 2, Section 301, which targets unfair trade practices. This one is more targeted, but it's a slow, bureaucratic process that requires a formal investigation by the U.S. Trade Representative. He could also use Option 3, Section 232, the national security route he favored in his first term for things like steel. But this too requires a lengthy investigation, this time by the Commerce Department. Finally, there's the most aggressive alternative, a throwback to the Smoot-Hawley era, which allows for a 50% tariff. However, it's very short-term, lasting only 5 months, and its legality could face new challenges. The bottom line is that while Trump has signaled a backup plan is ready, all of his alternatives are more limited, slower, and more constrained than the emergency powers the Supreme Court just took off the table. Now for the $175 billion question. What happens to all the money that was collected under these now illegal tariffs? In 2025 alone, the U.S. government collected a staggering $287 billion in customs duties, peaking at $30 billion in a single month. With about 60% of that revenue coming from the invalidated tariffs, we're talking about up to $175 billion in potential refunds. So who gets that money back? The government collected the cash from importers and companies, not directly from consumers. Therefore, any refunds will go back to those same importers and companies. The key insight here is that there is no direct path for that money to return to your wallet. Whether companies decide to lower their prices or simply pocket the refund as profit is entirely their decision. This gets back to the real household impact of the tariff strategy. The average U.S. household paid an estimated $1,000 more for goods in 2025 because of these tariffs. So while the companies that paid the tariffs may get a refund, there's no guarantee that consumers will see any of that benefit in the form of lower prices. So what does this new trade reality look like, and what should we be watching in the coming months? First is Trump's next move. We'll be watching to see in the next 30 to 60 days which of those limited legal tools he tries to use first. Second is the refund race. All eyes will be on the process to return that $175 billion and whether it translates into any real savings for consumers. Third, we'll watch for congressional action. With midterm elections on the horizon, will Congress pass new trade laws to either grant or restrict the president's authority? Fourth is the president's upcoming trip to China. With his most powerful tariff threat now gone, his negotiating leverage has been significantly reduced. Fifth, we need to monitor the manufacturing data. Will the reduction in tariff uncertainty finally lead to a restart in factory hiring? And finally, keep an eye on consumer prices. With the effective tariff rate cut nearly in half, will we see prices for imported goods begin to fall? The tariff era as we knew it is over. The future now depends on a complex dance between Congress, the courts, and the markets.